10, some feedback on what we've been working on and what we can tell you about what's going on up in Raleigh. And it's set up for the constituents of District 77, tonight District 76. And it's not about a Republican representative reporting back to Republican people. It's about me, your representative, reporting back to the constituents of 77. And as I said, tonight 76. So all partisanship stopped at the door. You are no longer a Republican, a Democrat, or an unaffiliated person. You're just a resident of District 77, of course 76. What we're going to do is, it's kind of a free-form meeting, but we do follow Robert's rules to some extent, so everybody gets a chance to ask questions. If you, we will cover some stuff going on up in Raleigh, and then open up to you. Make sure you talk about whatever interest that you have, whatever is concerning you about what's going on in Raleigh, whether it's coash ponds or Common Core or whatever it is. We'll open up and you get. But we're going to ask you to raise your hand. You'll be recognized. If more than one of you raise your hand, we'll mark down who's next in line to take in order. And I ask you to try to get your question out in 30 seconds or quicker if you can, so that we can make more time for everybody to get a question in there. So, having said that, and we are talking one at a time, and so if you have a follow-up question, we'll recognize that, but then we're going to move on to somebody else, again, to make sure everybody gets a turn to ask questions. Any questions right now? Okay, because this will all be on the midterm. All right, very good. Carl Ford, anything you want to say before we start?
I personally, I'd like to open some word of prayer. Father God, I thank you for this day and this time together. God, and we're all the words in these two tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm glad that you're here. Like Mary said, regardless of your party, whatever, I'm here to serve you tonight. I'm here to earn my $285 for this week. And I did want to start with that because I did get somebody 2 weeks ago that said, man, all the money you are making. And I said, well, wait, how much do you think you make? $175,000 a year. I said, wow. So just to clear that up, no. It's $285 a week, $104 per day, per diem when we're in session. And because we haven't gotten a raise in 23 years, we get 29 cents a mile. Everybody else gets 56 cents. We get 29 cents a mile. So I just wanted to clear that up. I'm not griping about it. I'm just wanted to clarify that because undoubtedly some people thought we made a whole lot more money than what we did. But I'm here tonight to earn that money and to answer your questions and try, on my part, this gentleman right here knows a lot more than I do. He's been there longer. But to try on my part to tell you what's going on there and how we're spending your tax dollars. All right? Thank you.
Well, as you all know, this is crunch time. The whole purpose of the short session is to tweak the budget. During a long session in North Carolina, we pass a 2-year budget. And during the budget, we come in to see how we're doing compared to the first year of that budget, and then make any adjustments going into the second year. The fiscal year, of course, starts July 1st. The only legislative things that, there are just a few legislative things that meet the criteria to be discussed or passed, worked on, if you will, during a short session. First criteria, and the one we generally live by, is that it has to have made the crossover point in the long session, which simply means if the bill started in the House by a certain cutoff date, it has to have crossed over into the Senate, and vice versa. If it originated in the Senate, it has to cross over into the House to be eligible to be heard in the short session if it's not taken care of in the long session. And then there are certain other bills, constitutional amendments, resolutions, things like that, that can be heard and worked on throughout the short session. But the primary focus of the short session is to work on the budget. And what typically happens is first the governor will send his or her budget over to the House and to the Senate. This is Governor McCrory's budget, the first one and the only one he sent over to us. Then we switch chambers every session. So this session, it was the Senate's turn to work on their budget proposal first. This was their first budget proposal. Okay, this is the Senate's first. This is their amended version. And this is another amended version, another amended version, and yet the final. And so this is all the Senate there. So went from the House to the Senate, and this is the House. This is our first take at it, our second take at it. And what happens with this is basically all they really amount to is each chamber, each branch is basically socializing what they feel are the priorities of where the money should be spent going into the second year. And this year was probably the most radical change of differences of opinions that I've ever seen between the House and the Senate versions, but and particularly in certain areas. But what it does is establishes for each chamber that's going to work on this what the executive branch of the governor and the opposite chamber, the House or the Senate, feels the way the money should be reallocated or the budget should be tweaked, if you will. And what happens then is the House's version here, you'll see up here it says Senate Bill 44. That's what all this is. The Senate sent their budget proposal over to the House. The House Appropriations Committee and the chamber, the whole House, looked at the bill and said, this is what we're going to change. And it goes to appropriations and our various appropriation subcommittees. Now, I'm going to digress for just a minute for explanation purposes. When you get sent to the General Assembly, you basically have two standing committees that you want to ask to be on, either finance or appropriations. Finance is the branch of the standing committee. A standing committee means it's there year-round. That's a standing committee that looks over revenue sources. Appropriations gets involved in how the money's spent. And when I came up there in 2011, Fred Steen, who was our senior member at the time, became a senior member at that time, was already on appropriations. And I felt to give Rowan County full strength and best representation, I would opt to go on finance. And so I'm on finance. I really don't get involved in the committee work on dividing money up. I get involved on the part where they report it out to the rest of the caucus, and then we start arguing about what we didn't like, which is one of the ways that the historic preservation tax credit got back into the budget, because somebody not necessarily involved in appropriations lobbied hard for it. So Carl took Fred's position in '76, and he is on appropriations. And you were on what subcommittee?
DHS. And in appropriations the other day, we had 84 amendments to the budget, most of which were voted down.
So you got in appropriations then. Appropriations divides into subcommittees, and each committee takes over a section of this budget. If you look through one of these, you'll see the sections in here. They're divided up. You have DHHS, transportation, commerce. You'll have, it just goes on and on. Okay? So that's how that system's working. Now, we made adjustments to this budget. And we made adjustments to their bill, 744, and sent it back over to them to vote to concur. They did not concur with the changes that we made. As I said, there were some big differences between the Senate's budget and ours. The most glaring one was in regards to education. The Senate had proposed a 11 or 11.5% raise for teachers, but to pay for it, they were eliminating all teacher assistant positions, and just various things like that to get the funding to cover a massive 11.5% raise. The House proposed a 5% raise, and so you can see that kind of difference has to be. So when they voted not to concur with our changes, each chamber then had to appoint conferees to meet together and work out the differences of opinion on that. And that's where we're at right now. When the conferees reach agreement, that conference report will come out, and that's when, again, I will see that. And Carl, were you appointed to the conference? We had 25 members, and it was mostly the subcommittee chairs, not the vice chairs or the members, but we had 25 from the House, I think 12 from the Senate that are hashing this out. So that's where we are in the budget. In the meantime, the rest of us are working on bills going through. We've had bills go through on Common Core. He knows more about that than I do, to be honest with you. We've had bills going through there on what they now call P3, the prosperity zones, the commerce, public-private realignment to move the state forward. And we just had the unemployment insurance adjustment bill vetoed by the governor. I think it was on either Monday or Tuesday. And what I found disheartening about that is Governor Corey has now vetoed 3 bills, 2 last year, this one this week. And Dean Art, Representative Dean Art had 1 bill that Governor Corey vetoed last year, and so did I. And this year, Dean and I were both on the UI bill with Julia Howard. So he and I have the distinction of having 2 of the 3 vetoes the governor's ever done be our bills. And we'll be talking about that Monday, though, in caucus as to how we're going to respond to that, because the provisions of that bill are extremely important to get put in place because of the impacts it'll have on some of the changes and particularly the costs associated with not making the adjustments we need to on the UI. Carl, you want okay. During this time of the year, it's pretty typical that a lot of bills that didn't get passed or got lay-weighted in one chamber or the other, people will have a tendency to throw this together in what is called an omnibus bill. An omnibus bill means many things are in it, and they aren't necessarily related. And the thing I dislike about that is, even though it's a parliamentary procedure and it's absolutely, acceptable, what I don't like about that is we don't have a line item veto when we're voting. We have to vote for all of it or none of it. And typically what happens in an omnibus bill, you might agree with 85 or 90% or even 95% of the stuff that's in there. And you always get into that dilemma of, do you vote it out for the one thing you disagree with that shouldn't be in there in your opinion, or and throw everything else out the window, or do you vote for it and move on, maybe try to correct that next year? So we've had several omnibus bills go through here last week. One of them was the omnibus tax law changes, House Bill 1050, and Senate Bill 743, which is a regulatory reform bill, and Senate Bills 493, I think. It was 434 and 493 that have gone through this past week. And there were some things in 493 that we held our ground on, and when they did a vote count on the Republican side of the aisle, they realized they couldn't get that bill passed, so they pulled the bill from the House floor. And I think it was off for 2 days before they brought it back up, but they took it back to committee and took things out, and they got to the point where we could vote for it. And I think Carl and I were both in that one. All right, so let's see. We are working on the coal ash situation. How many of you heard the coal ash problem here? Okay, good. That's good. Here's something a little ironic for you. Back on February 7th, there was a company called Phoenix Environmental Systems wanted to give a presentation. Were any of you in that? They had a lot of folks there, business people in town, and some of the local leaders, elected officials, and they held it over here at the Hampton Inn. It was a good presentation, and it was about what their company could do about coal ash and how to eliminate it. And that was on February 7th. On February 10th, we had the Dam River spill. And it was just an ironic coincidence there, the way that worked out. But on March 21st, shortly after that, I had asked the lobbyist for Duke Power to arrange a tour of the coal ash ponds. I wanted to see them. And I extended that. She set that up, and I extended an invitation out to the whole delegation, Carl, Gene McLaren, and I don't know if Gene made it, and Andrew Brock. And at the same time, I didn't know, but the couple of the county commissioners here had also requested a meeting with Duke. And as it turned out, they combined it all. We all toured the place on March 21st. I wanted to see the coal ash ponds, and I'm not an engineer, but I wanted to see what the structural integrity of these ponds were over there. The county commissioners were more interested in helping them alleviate the problem of coal ash by being willing to take it for the airport over here, where there's a pretty good spot they can utilize it. So we had that meeting on the 21st. And since that time, the governor came up with a plan for how this should be addressed, the spill and the storage and the disposal of coal ash. The Senate's come up with a plan, which you might have read about in the paper here. I think the Salisbury posted a pretty good article on it. Anyway, there was a pretty good argument, and it's apparently one of the most stringent requirements of any state when it comes to coal ash mitigation. This would eventually call for all the coal ash ponds to be out of the state by 2019. So that's one thing we're working on there. Coal ash. Teacher compensation is not a matter of if, it's a matter of how and how much. It is definitely going to be done with here, and we'll probably know within the next 7 to 10 days exactly how much of a raise it is and how it's going to be paid for. Carl, I'm not leaving out any major issue besides teacher compensation. Comment, we're going to cover that. Did the regulatory report. All right, so we will probably get the budget done. I think we'll get it done by Wednesday this week. If I'm wrong, it'll be the following week. But at some point, this thing will be resolved, and when it is, we will adjourn, sign, die, and then that'll be the last time we meet, unless the governor calls special meeting, until after the election and the new representatives are elected. So, having said all that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and again, we'll talk about anything you want to cover. If we don't know the answer, we will get back to you.
Thank you. In the past, you've been talking about how much the state owes on unemployment insurance payments and so forth. And I was just wondering if you could briefly speak to that in a little bit more detail, where we are, where we're going, and is that yet having a favorable effect?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked that, because that's one of the reasons why overriding this veto or addressing this veto is so critical. Because if these other provisions in the bill, and I can show you the bill, it's here. There's a different. This is the fun of the bill. It just goes through different versions as you. Every time you change it, you have to have a new version of it. But it's here, and it's the impact of that, why it's so important is there. But for those of you who don't understand his question, I'll give you a little quick background. When I went up there in 2011, I knew we were going up there facing a it was suspected anywhere $2.85 to $3.2 billion deficit. We were already that much in the hole going up to plan for a new budget. But we had made a commitment to sunset the surcharges on personal income tax and sales tax that were supposed to sunset anyway. That added another $800 million to the shortage that we had going in to drop our first budget. What I didn't know until I got up there was North Carolina started borrowing money in February of 2009 to pay our unemployment benefits. And we had one of the highest unemployment rates in the state because North Carolina still had about 22% of its state revenue was coming from manufacturing. And we got hit disproportionately during that recession. So what happens is when you run out of unemployment benefits, the federal government has a program that shoves the money down to you automatically. They also have a program where they start taking it back automatically. And we had paid $77 million in 2011, I believe it was, $77 million, not on the principal, but on the interest. And we paid $70 million the next year. The impact of that is you get a credit. Each state gets a credit on their FUTA tax. And we were losing, every year we lose 0.3% of that credit. So what that meant was every year, every employer in the state that pays the federal unemployment tax, they pay that on the first $7,000 that each employee makes. So every year that was going up by $42. And the impact on that would be if we did absolutely nothing, by 2019, assuming everything was static, just kept going forward the way it was, it would take us till 2019 to pay that debt back to the federal government. During that time, however, our unemployment or our FUTA tax that each employer would be paying would have escalated up to over $127 per employee. And now why that's important is because you have people like Robert Van Gaines here in each county, and you have the Department of Commerce trying to lure companies here, try to attract them here. And one of the questions they would ask is, they look at the cultural things, they look at the schools, they look at a lot of things that help make that decision. But the bottom line is they come here to make money. And when they ask the question, well, if I come here, do I have to pay those higher taxes? And the answer is a resounding yes, even though they weren't here and helped contribute to that anymore. So that's why we made those changes. The changes took effect almost a year ago, on July 1st. At that point, we owed $2.5 billion. That was behind only California, Pennsylvania, and, oh gosh, who was the third one? New York owed more taxes than us. And now, week before last, I found out we have reduced that now. We are down to $980 million is all we owe the feds. If we continue at this rate, we have projected that we will pay that debt off by November of 2015. And yes, it has impacted, it has been one of the contributing factors, not the primary one, but one of the contributing factors. Because our fear was not only would companies not want to relocate here, but the companies we had here would start to try to increase productivity every time they lost somebody rather than replace somebody. So in order to get jobs growth, in order to keep the economy going, we had to address that. And I think it was one of the better things that the legislature did in 2011-12, and it's paying off. Chuck?
First of all, you're still under a lot higher tax bracket than the Board of Education.
I call that food stamps right now. I don't know what you're talking about.
The 5% rate you talk about the teachers, as I understood, the governor had recommended 2%. Is this the expansion of that?
I don't know if you call it expansion now. And you have to remember, when they talk about, I'm sorry?
An increase in that?
Well, yeah. When you talk about 2%, 5%, or 11%, we're talking about an average increase. So the 5% is more realistic, given our financial situation that the state's still in. 5% is more realistic and certainly within range of doing. A big factor for that is we said 2 years ago, 2 years ago we gave the only raise that teachers had, the state employees and COLA and all that. And last year, when we got hit again, I think it was $473 million in that neighborhood with the Medicaid overruns, that took any discretionary funding we had right away. But there was a teacher's pay increase considered then, but that just ate that up. So the explanation for that was given too. Medicaid wiped us out. Until we get our arms around Medicaid, that is the biggest financial threat we have to the state. And it's just unbelievable. So when it hit us the second time, that's when Medicaid really got a real good look over. And it is far from what I call fixed or the way we want it to be. But this year we're projecting somewhere between, Carl, remember, was less than 125 million was the last number I heard. Somewhere between 90 and 125 million. And that's still a bad overrun.
That's projected.
That's projected. But that's almost a relief to hear that when in the last 2 years previously, you're almost $1 billion over. So looking at tightening on the Medicaid controls, getting control of the fiscal responsibility in there is what's going to free up money for us to do things that we want to do, things that we need to do. Yes, sir?
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
Quick. That pay raise, will that be allocated based on percentage of salaries, or will it be allocated to the newer teachers, less teachers been there the least amount of time get more, and less to the more established teachers, or will it be across the board?
Yes. Back on February 10th, the governor, the president, the pro tem of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House made a joint announcement that beginning this year, teachers would be in the first, what we call the first step. There are 37 steps in the teacher pay plan, which to me would be, to look at that as a teacher, I would be demoralized going right into the program. But that's the way it's always been in North Carolina, 37 steps. And but those people tell you they're not in it for the money, and they know that's the pay structure going into it. Believe them, they're not in it for the money. But what those three announced was that they would take that first step, basically affecting people in the first 7 years, and more or less, but definitely the new teachers. And they would this year raise it to $33,000. It's currently $30,800. They would raise it to $33,000, which is a regional average. When we talk about regional average, we're generally talking about 12 states that are figured in the southeastern region. So that would take it up to the regional average. Then, part of the announcement was next year, 2015-16, they would go up to $35,000. Now, they did say after that, which nobody apparently heard or paid attention to, was this is phase one of the teacher's pay plan. When we know how much money we are going to lose or make on the Medicaid deal coming in March or April, then we'll have a raise for the rest of the teachers. Well, mainly what happened is, all the hoopla over, they're getting paid more than us, and I've been here 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years. And that's like, we understand that, but you're getting a raise, we just don't know how much we just don't know how much to spend. So that was it. The 33 and the 35,000 were commitments that were made, so that a starting teacher in 2015-16, a starting teacher in North Carolina will make no less than $35,000. No teacher in North Carolina would make less than the national average. That was the plan, and that's what they stuck to in this. And all these pay plans, they have the 33,000 and the 35,000.
Chuck, when we got that original 1% and 2% was, at first they had talked about a 2% pay raise for anybody making under 50,000, 1% making over 50,000, which, not the percentage, but I like that idea. It gets us, helps out with compression there, but then it's gotten worked out, and the teacher pay thing continues to change, and I think it'll change some more in the next few days, with the Senate wanting 11%, and a bunch of things tagged onto it, and the House wanting an average of 5%. But everybody gets a raise. Everybody's going to get a raise. But I'm like Harry, we don't know how much yet. I think it hopefully will be settled this week.
You also have, in that raise package in the House, you have a 1% raise again for state employees and a cost of living, 1.44% cost of living. Ben, I'll get back to you. I see that.
Representative Ford, kind of a procedural question. As you're hearing budget amendment requests from different parties and different groups, for instance, the historic tax credit, how are those heard by your group, and are they voted on and then implemented into the budget for crossover and concurrence, or how do you make the determination whether to even hear that group? I don't want to call them special interest groups because they're not all, but how do you make the determination whether to even hear them?
Any representative on appropriations, and then we'll get to the rest of it, can bring up an amendment in the appropriations meeting. And to be honest, 95% of the time, while they're talking about it, they're passing it out to us. We didn't even see it. And it's usually pretty fast. And then it's based on the ayes and noes, and sometimes they'll call for division, raising your hands, and sometimes they'll call for a roll call. Everybody has to say aye or no. It gets a little interesting. Sometimes an amendment will be that long, sometimes it'll be pages.
So the representatives are bringing the amendments for the group?
Yes.
Okay.
And sometimes it will be a committee as a whole. Sometimes it will be the chairs. The chairs have met and we agree. Chairs of education have met and we agree on this amendment. Sometimes it'll be a technical amendment where something was just a little crazy and they have to correct it. Then when you get to the House floor, those same amendments can come right back.
But are we seeing a lot of items that were cut out of the budget? Looking at the schedule, it appears that they're being brought up more and more, and so things that were cut out are starting to inch their way back in?
Some things do at a lesser amount, so maybe somebody say, oh, okay, if you're going to do that instead of this, then we'll look at it. And some things are not money, but they're tweaking policy, and some of us will go, well, yeah, I couldn't take that one, but this one's okay. So, yeah, sometimes they change on purpose so they can get it passed. And I'll give Representative Glazier of Cumberland County, he's one of the Democrats that I enjoy working with because he tries to work with folks and he gets a lot of stuff passed because he knows procedure and he comes up with some good ideas, really does.
Let me just add on to that, the last question you had about things clawing back in. When we did the tax revision, we lowered the CIT, the corporate income tax, and lowered the personal income tax. And when you do that, you're giving up revenue. So the idea behind the tax revision was supposed to be revenue neutral. As it's turning out, it's actually revenue less. But there are a list. I don't have it with me. There's a list of things that were scheduled to sunset, tax exemptions that were scheduled to sunset, and then other exemptions which were there permanently. Like if you go to GNC and buy health products, you pay sales tax at the counter. If you buy those same products from your doctor at the doctor's office, you don't. And so that was tax. If you buy tires at Walmart, you pay a tax on tire, but you don't pay tax on the surface that the tire's mounted. Now you do. So, but that's where the revenue was. A strategic expansion of sales tax on different services and a strategic selection of sunsets to allow the sunset. Now, in that group of sunsetting taxes, tax exemption was the tax exemption for the historic preservation tax exemption, which this county was the 5th biggest user in the state of. And then there was the sunsetting of the film tax incentives, which Wilmington was the biggest benefit factor of, in Mecklenburg County as well. And those two were supposed to sunset, I think on January 1st or December 31st of this year. And then in the expansion of the sales tax, we included in there outside events. So, you go to a rock concert, you go to the fair, and we had, local folks here writing us pretty heartfelt messages that they wanted to get exemption for county fairs. And so the clawback was, as you probably read in the paper, saw in the news, people were trying to get the historic preservation tax credit back. People down in Wilmington, Representative Davis and on our side of the aisle, and Representative Hamilton on the other side of the aisle, both from that area, just passionately campaigning for the film credits. And finally, on our budget, he managed to get some version of the film credit on the floor of the House. But that's people we're trying to claw back. This is the short bill to exempt county fairs and other events here. But as soon as this was proposed on the floor, just for county fairs and nonprofits, Representative Carney wanted to exempt and include in the exemption art exhibits and things of that nature, because cultural arts are extremely important too. So that failed on the floor. We did not exempt them, and I really don't think it had an impact on attendance.
What we found out is a lot of fairs are going to go, this is forward thinking in my opinion, they're going to go to pay everybody to come for free. So there's a way to get around it, because then you probably double or triple the attendance, then they spend it on the inside. And that some of the fairs are already doing that, and some of them are already talking about reducing rates anyway. But basically on a fair ticket here, it was going to be like 25 cents tax. So 25, 30 cents. So it wasn't going to be that big a deal. It was just like, you tax everybody or nobody. That was my deal, was let's tax everybody or nobody so we can reduce the income tax, reduce other taxes, keep the sales tax back, not add that penny back, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what happened there. It was one or none.
I have Larry.
All of it.
With regard to the historic preservation tax, I don't view that as a essential government function. I'm not sure really tax credits for film industries would be an essential government function either. So I hope that both of you will seriously consider voting against that. But with regard to those two, do you know yet if that is going to be part of the budget?
They're in the conference report, and we're very anxious to see what these guys come out with.
I think it'll be out or greatly reduced. I could be wrong, and usually I am, but I think it'll be out or greatly reduced.
As a follow-up in general, I'd like to see grants reduced. It's often easy for anybody to say, hey, we could spend 5 to 10, 15, or 20% and get the rest of it from the state. And so everybody is for that, because, hey, they say that's 80% free money. But then we have to pay that 80% for the rest of the stuff. And so I think on grants like this, if the county or the city wants to do it, fine, let them raise the money. But I'd like to see the grants in the whole decreased as much as we can.
I overheard an apology. I didn't call on you. What is your question?
Well, my question was regarding what Chuck was asking about with the teacher, the platform for raising the salaries. The Senate Bill 744 version 7 reflected the House's recommendations, where the caps were taken off the veteran teachers, where the upper tier of about 30% of the teachers had been either slated to take a cut or to be capped. Is that to remain the way it was as it goes forward, or is the Senate wishing it to revert back to their initial
Well, the last part,
recommendation?
the Senate would love to have their way on everything. But as I said, all these provisions that we passed in the House, all the changes we made to 744 are now in conference. And the Senate doesn't have as much appetite for things like film credits or the historic tax preservation. They have a harder line when it comes to things like teachers' assistants and so forth. It is, when I first got up there, one of the things I always heard when we were working on the very first budget that we took over was that the Senate is historically more favorable to the university system, while the House is more compassionate towards the K-12, but our community colleges are getting the leftovers from the table, basically, and they're an excellent system. But we made some great strides here in the last couple of years with the community college system, in conjunction with UNC. We did the articulation agreement here, had them bring that up to speed, and now folks can go to a community college for 2 years and get the vast majority of their courses accredited at the university level, in a state university, and then their associate degrees are taken in there, and the grade requirements are not that stringent. So it's we did do something there, and there were several other bills for the community colleges that it puts them on a little better basis. I think they've historically been used to getting in budget times.
But the final version of the education budget passed Thursday unanimously in the House, bipartisan. Everybody, Republican, Democrat, all voted for it. And there are some changes in the point carried. There'll be some more changes.
Well, but
everybody's going up.
Yeah, the other day, Speaker Tillis and the governor had a joint press conference, and they announced this budget. But I mean, what they actually did was that the House took the education part of the budget out, and it was a separate bill and sent it to the Senate. And I don't think it's going anywhere. But Jeff, you first.
Yeah, regarding the teacher, the money, where would the money come from for these teacher salary increases? As I understand it, the House was working on something to raise more money through the lottery, and the Senate was working on trying to cut teacher aides, neither of which sound like healthy sorts of things for responsible government leadership, etc. What's the status of those things?
Well, I mean, one of the first bills I had passed was in Purdue's term was the E-Verify bill. I came home, I told the story, somebody who's been here before. I came home that weekend, I was watching the news, and they cut away to the guy covering the legislature, and he began to talk about the bills that passed, and he started describing E-Verify, and he was completely wrong about the bill. But, that really taught me that you can't believe everything here. Now, the House Appropriations Committee, what they did do is they spoke with people in the lottery and asked, if you were to increase your advertising, what kind of impact would that have on revenue? And they gave them a number. Now, and that was fine, but when they incorporated that number into the budget, again, the way the process runs, when that came to the floor, Representative Stam put out a bill called it makes everything honest lottery. And that bill was to require the Lottery Commission in their advertising to be honest about it. That if you win a $25 million jackpot, you don't really get $25 million unless you're willing to take it in increments over the next 20 years or so. Or if you buy out of it and take it in one lump sum, you're probably going to get about, $14 million, and then you pay federal taxes on that too. So, I think it doesn't matter. You're not getting $25 million, and that's the point. And then what the odds are, you see an advertising, you get the right 6 numbers, you win this $25 million. And then, but it doesn't tell you what the odds are. See, we wanted all this stuff in there. Well, then the lottery people come back around and said, well, if you do all that, we can't, that'll impact sales too. So we're going to come down $47 million on that projection. And that's when, basically, things got sensationalized over the dependency on the lottery. And there was never a dependency on the lottery for that amount of money. And we had money either in the, you can call it a slush fund if you want, for R&R or rainy day account. We had the money in there, push come to shove, to cover the house plan. And we can cover the house plan with or without that lottery fund. So that's, but it made great news. The house is depending on lottery sales to, but we've been depending on lottery sales as a state ever since they passed the dog thing. It was supposed to complement, not, the money, and it hasn't. You know, there was a great article in one of the papers, I don't know, maybe today or yesterday. I get 5 papers when I come home, 5 Post, 5 Charlotte Observers, and I read them all, you know, in the morning, and I don't know which paper it was in, is it Thursdays or maybe today's? And Tom Campbell had an editorial there about how fungible money is in the general fund, and you ought to read it, it's good, because, you know, when you pass something like we're gonna have a gas tax, and we're gonna put all the money in the highway trust fund, and it's just for the highway trust fund, and then, you know, for 20 years, they've been taking $125 million out of there a year and transfer it to the general fund while the bridges and the roads are going down. And now we're in a situation we're trying to make that work too, but it happens to coincide at a time in which cars are being run by propane and electric, and cars are getting much better gas mileage, so the amount of gasoline we're selling is dwindling too. So therefore the revenue on gas taxes, and that's where we get our money in North Carolina for roads, is off the gas tax and certain registration fees associated with automobiles. Jack, you have questions?
Yeah, 2 points. There's a $645,000 transitional fund, and I can't remember the name of it, that disappeared this year from the state. And I can't give you the name, but the amount is $245K. That amounts, and I checked with John Softly on this, that amounts to, for the city, people in the city, of a 2.42 cents per hundred tax increase. So when you all take money out...
No, I'm going to interject something.
Okay.
Some folks say, 2 years ago, we passed a $50,000, no, come back to that. We passed a $50,000 bill to give businesses, LLCs, Subchapter S, and C Corps, a $50,000 exemption on the first $50,000 that they made. We gave them an exemption. It was planned for 2 years. It was to help spark the economy along. It was not a bill passed to do that. Now, when we did the tax revision, we had to drop that off. Now, people are saying, you increased the taxes on small business. That's not true. We gave them a 2-year pass, and then when the 2 years is up, we had a complete tax revision, which changed well, of course, that dropped off, but that didn't raise their tax. It simply reverted back to what the tax was. But at the same time, LLCs, Subchapter S, and C Corps typically put their money through their personal income tax. Is that all right? And then we dropped that down to 5.8 this year, and next year it should drop down to 5.75. So there's still a tax decrease there now. Well, and that's the same thing with this. What you're referring to, I believe, is the
Privilege license?
No. Well, he might be talking about that. I thought he was talking about the hold harmless. Yeah. See, Salisbury, is that what you're talking about? The hold harmless, that was also temporary. Julia Howard and I were able to lobby to get that extended last year, and it brought, I believe it was 693,000 into Salisbury, and I think it was 95,000 for Cleveland. But not all the towns were participating in that, and I think those were the only 2 in Rowan that did. Maybe Spencer did, but those were the 2 large amounts. But that ended.
All I'm getting at is
Well, what was it and how did it work?
Well, I can't remember what, there was a change before Ira got up there. There was something changed in a revenue stream for the towns. I can't remember what the General Assembly took away from them, but to help them phase into that revenue adjustment, they gave them a hold harmless on the sales tax, which was reversion of money back from sales tax collector. Okay, but it was a temporary situation. And when they did the overall tax revision, they said, okay, that has to go too. But it was supposed to end off anyway. Now, the other thing you might be talking about, Carl, you want to talk about the privilege tax?
Privilege license tax, it's not been reported exactly right everywhere I read it. It's most of the towns in Rowan don't have one. China Grove doesn't have one. Landis has a small one. Kannapolis has a small one. But it was being abused, especially by the city of Charlotte. And they were charging people to do business in Charlotte. You had to pay the privilege license tax. They were charging people in 88 counties in North Carolina, every state, and 4 different countries, for businesses that were doing business in Charlotte. So they were greatly abusing it, without a doubt, not just people inside their city limits. So Harry and I and some others worked to, let's just don't cut them off now, to be honest. And most people don't know this. Last year's budget, when it was signed by the government, those were sunset next week. they were to be cut off July 1st. So what we did was we went in and tweaked it. Now it's July 1st of next year. It gives them another year to work it out. Plus, we've already been in negotiations with the League of Municipalities of how to make something fair. If they want to charge it, it'll be up to them and their board, but it's going to be a set amount. Because it was all over the board, and we heard from large corporations, especially grocery stores, whose profits are built on pennies and quarter cent and stuff, and they were having to charge different prices in different towns. You go to a national chain, why do they charge more for this peanut butter in this town than they do in this one? Well, it's because in some towns they were paying $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 privilege license, and the other town they were paying zero. So it was affecting business, it was affecting consumers, and so we just had to, hey, we got to rein this in. So they've got a year to work on it. They still keep collecting it for a year, and then next year it'll either be gone or there'll be some kind of settlement.
Put a cap on it. One of the,
That's what we're going to do.
there's a separate issue. I had one of these clowns call up, robocall, and wanted to fix my house for me. Okay, they're going to do all kinds of wonderful things for me, to me. And the first question I asked, I said, do you have a business license here in my city, in Salisbury? Click. So it serves a purpose, and I've seen it many times, and I understand what you're saying. I paid it when up north. As long as it's a reasonable number, a few $100s. We paid less on a $10 million business. We paid less than $1,000. And we had 10 different outlets.
Well, you brought two very valid points here, Jack.
That's a reasonable number.
What they were doing, and it wasn't just Charlotte, but they were really most egregious. Charlotte we actually had, I don't know about 88 counties, I thought it was all of them, but I know that Representative Bill Brawley from Mecklenburg informed me that we had 88 businesses in Rowan County that were paying a Mecklenburg privilege tax.
400,
And it wasn't, it was just if you were going to go do business there, you had to buy the privilege tax.
Yeah.
What we were changing in there, the first concept was to make it a flat, and as Carl said, if you had several locations, whether you were Burger King or Wendy's or whoever, or Food Line, and you had several locations, you had one for each one of them. And during the whole thrashing about taking these back, because it was an outcry, I think across the state it was something like $62 million, 62 point something million dollars is what would be affected. But there was talk about, we're talking about food deserts and all these things. Well, there was a Food Line in Mecklenburg that closed because when you reach that point, as Carl was saying, there were the margins that close, it's just not worth the effort to be there. And so but there was even one place in Japan, I think it was, had one business in Japan had a Charlotte business. So one of the concepts was, okay, let's just make it a flat rate because the grocery store might be paying $20,000 or $30,000, the tattoo parlor might be paying, $50. So we want to make it equitable and just say a flat rate of $100. And you had to have brick and mortar presence in the town.
But again, most towns don't even charge it at all.
But now what they're talking about doing is, over the course of next year, as Carl said, they haven't got extended it, but during the course of next year, maybe come up with some type of tier a system where it's a little more reasonable based on whatever.
It'll be an option for the town. They don't have to.
Yeah, they're going to have another problem with the growth of service businesses, which don't have any bricks and mortar. I mean, I can run a business out of a room in my house, and I'm not considered to have bricks and mortar. What you can do is do it on a basis of sales within the county, and make it a county at the county level. How you do it isn't the point. I guess what I'm saying is that it's a protection for the public to keep people come by your door, knock on your door. I'm selling magazines. You have a license? Well, no, I don't. Off the property, and I'll call the cops. It cuts down on that kind of scam.
There's Girl Scout cookies for him.
Girl Scout. There it is.
Stay away from that house.
That is second point. When like most accountants, I did my taxes on the 12th of April. I see no reason to rush into these things. But I was shocked to find my state income tax was up quite substantially on a percentage basis. And I thought back, and I think my perception is that the people I did taxes for were also paying a higher state tax than they had in the previous year. Now, I can't verify that because I'm not allowed to go back and look at their records. But you can, the Department of Taxation can. And I would suggest to you that you get the Department of Taxation to look at the state taxes paid this year for the 2013 versus 2012 and see whether it did increase for the middle and lower income
Are
people.
you talking about businesses or?
No, I'm talking about individuals.
My taxes went down, state taxes.
Okay.
Now, my federal taxes went up.
I guess you make more money than my class.
I'm $285 a week.
Yeah, you're going off on another tangent, Jack, so I'm gonna go over to.
Okay.
This actually may be related to that, and it's not a sophisticated question on that.
We might be
In the
able to
last-
handle that then.
In the last budget, the earned income credit was done away with, which affected poor people. At the same time, we did away with the estate tax, which helped rich people, having estates over $5.7 million. We got a tax cut, even though our taxes went up, and we've got another one scheduled for next January. Am I right? There's going to be another tax cut?
Yes, on the first.
Is there any discussion about raising revenue? I mean, the last poll I saw was 66% of people in North Carolina would pay more taxes to support our education system and some other things. Is there any discussion at all about raising tax, some kind of taxes? I mean, we cut that 900,000 people off the earned income. The poor people didn't get the earned income credit, and yet we're giving rich people more tax
Well, okay,
credits.
I'm gonna answer that for you, and Carl, you can jump in if you want. There's a real simplification of assessing that the estate tax only benefited rich people because it was at $5 million. It doesn't take much property nowadays or much of an estate to make $5 million value. And so the whole conception that this was a tax relaxation for rich people is really a simplification of what that really did do. Now, there were a smaller number of people in that because just the way society works, just fewer people hold on that stuff. But the thought behind it was, you leave a simple farm that's been in the family for 2 or 3 generations, and you die, and you can't leave it to your family, to your son, to your daughter. Where's the justice in that? And the argument was, well, you have people who have a greater need. That may be the case, but robbing from Peter to pay Paul isn't justifiable just because Paul has a little more. And that was part of the argument. Now, the EITC was relaxed or sunset in on the state level, but it's still there at the federal level. And so we also did a few other things on that tax revision. We bumped up from $12,000 to $15,000 how much was actually tax-free. But as far as is there any talk about getting more revenue, other revenue streams? Yeah, that's always something. That's what we look at in finance. But you have to reach a certain point. The whole idea behind relaxing taxes and to let the sunset on the surcharges take effect was to put the money back in people's pocket, back in the economy, to spur the economy along. You can only squeeze an orange so much and you run out of juice. And what we were looking at, there was a completely different ideology or philosophy on what would make the economy move. And it's working. We put the money back into the economy, back into people's pockets, and it's going to... There's no easy solution that's going to make everybody happy and everybody get an equal piece of the pie. But in the long run, to make the engine go forward, that was the course we took for tax relaxation.
On the death tax, there was at least one family that we were made aware of that literally lost the family farm because of the death tax, the state tax, whatever you want to call it. That's just not fair. That's not right.
But now, wait a minute, they're not taxed on the whole estate, they're taxed on the estate beyond the 5.7 million. I mean, they don't pay any tax on the first 5.7
But
million.
where does it stop? Where do you stop getting taxed? You buy something and you pay for it the rest of your life. I personally, I have a lot of ideas that may or may not go in here tonight. Enough is enough.
Susan?
Is the Senate's plan to do teacher raises,
Yes.
with teacher assistants? Is that?
No.
No.
They were cutting
See, that's why I answered the first part, yes. But no in the second part, not in
No,
the
that's,
second.
I'll be honest, I don't know why they even came out with that. They should have known this, the House would not concur with that. You know, if you've ever walked into a school today, you know, you can't do it without teacher assistants. But when you have a school philosophy that is, you know, we take all comers, that's a pretty big umbrella. And, you know, you've got to have teacher assistants, at least in, you know, in those first few grades up to grade 3, you've got to have them. Either that or you need to change the formula for how, you know, how you're administering public education. Follow up?
I think they already cut families grades K1. Didn't they say that in the last board meeting, that teacher assistants?
That was a plan, I thought, I didn't go exactly as an absolute.
You might have done that locally, but we funded that.
That's not.
Ben?
A rising tide raises all ships. CNBC just recently re-polled North Carolina as one of the top 5 growth states. And I'm also every day looking at press releases and announcements from the governor on new jobs coming in. So that's where I see the additional revenue coming from, is all the new businesses coming in that are spurring economic growth, more property taxes for the county, et cetera. And hopefully pretty soon we'll land some here in Rowan County as well.
Well, we've got some, I'm proud of Rowan County from growing up with seeing textile jobs making a return at Tuscarora and China Grove, adding 70, 80 jobs and more, and then Gildan coming. I'm so proud and so glad to see textile jobs that I thought, and I said right here years ago, they're gone, they'll never come back, and now they're coming back, and I'm glad to hope we see more of that too.
You know, when you talk about rankings, I've said all along, even during the first Catawba Forum that I was in with the former representative, they were talking about rankings, and I said then, I don't like rankings. I think rankings are biased by whoever's put them out.
Yeah, but that's came from CNBC, they would.
Well, they wouldn't. No, I'm going to give you an example why I don't like it. You know, people talk about us being 48th in per pupil funding and 46th in teacher pay. But when you look at how you rank a state, when you're doing it on dollar amounts like that, you have to ask yourself, is that equitable when you, by comparison, to do that? If you rank the states by how much money they devote or dedicate out of their general fund to education, North Carolina ranks 11th in the United States and 2nd in the Southeast, because we fund, unlike anybody else, out of the general fund. And we always give about 55 to 57% of our general fund revenue to education. Most states, I think all the rest of them, support their schools through local funding and passing bonds and so forth. So when you look at it that way, then you can take it another step too. If you break down within the funding by state, federal, and local, we rank 8th county statewide. Our state ranks 8th. Our counties rank 46th. In the state, we rank 17th. So that when you look at it objectively, or from just another viewpoint, you see that all of this isn't the state's fault or the state's responsibility. Getting the public school system, providing a free public education is. And personally, I think we ought to look at the way we do that. And there are several other things in the Constitution I think probably call for a constitutional convention. The one we're working on right now was crafted in 1971 or 72. It's the 3rd reiteration of the state constitution that we have. And I think there's room for improvement. I think we have time for one more question. It's 7 o'clock right now. We have time for one more. It's
Just one question, the gap between the House bill and Senate bill in terms of the raises for the teacher 11 to 7, 1, and 5 million. Where is the Senate getting the money? Have they addressed that and spoken to that?
Yeah, they were cutting out all the teacher assistants, all the funding for that.
I'm sorry, that was the question too, was that,
And there were cuts in the UNC system, which I happen to agree with most of those cuts.
And then they were taking, you know, they also required, tenure, and they had all kinds of stipulations too. But they were actually just be making drastic cuts to pay for
Were they
that.
naive enough to think that a teacher would want a pay raise at the expense of a teacher's assistant? It's doubling their.
No, what they were thinking was, here's an 11% raise if you give up tenure and take away teacher's assistant. What ours did was, is if you have tenure, you keep it. Because it was just like when I was a county commissioner, we made a deal with you, we're gonna stick with it. But the new people that are hired, you know what, you're not gonna have it. So here it is. And now I think that's fair. Honoring the contract
Put
and
the
then.
master's program back in the house.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Master's package?
Yes.
Yeah. But again, it's the same thing. Rather than cutting the program off and then trying to buy people out, like the Senator's proposing, we just said, okay, this, it stops here. Next person coming through the doors on a different pay plan or not different pay plan, but a different benefits plan.
And you still get it if you get a master's in math, but you gotta be teaching math. You can't get a master's in one subject and then I want to teach another one. And a lot of people were getting masters to move up into management, principals, etc., administration. And it was a mess, and I think it's cleaned up now. Hopefully that'll stay.
I don't anticipate holding a town hall in July. I think if we go in, we're definitely going to go into July with the session. And then I have personal commitments the rest of July. Starting mid-August, I'm going back up to Raleigh probably two times a week or up to maybe 6 times a month or so to work on 10 different issues, bills, to get prepared for the upcoming long session next year. And there won't be much going on other than what we initiate ourselves. I mean, everybody's working independently, so there's nothing to really keep your prize up there. But it's easy to get my office number here in Salisbury, or just call me in Raleigh if you have an issue or question about things as they're being implemented or things that you hear about. Please give me a call. I anticipate we will start up the town hall meetings in February of next year after the session gets rolling, and we typically hold those at the end of the month. So, because there's nothing to talk about at the beginning of the month, we'll talk about it at the end of the month. So I want to thank you for coming out tonight, and if you have signed the log, the sheet, and put your email address on there, and if you're not already on my newsletter list, I will send that out to you. I send that out weekly during session, and thank you very much. And you can unsubscribe anytime you like.
To keep up with me, go to nchouse76.com, nchouse76.com. I don't send out an email, you can find out stuff there, or votecarl4.com, either one.
Because we did a quick update on Common Core. You mentioned it.
Common Core is that's part of the conference right now too. The Senate basically just changed the name of it. They did make some changes. The House really gutted it, and what I think was a better deal overall. So they're trying to work out those differences. What they didn't want to do was to go so far that we send $400 million back to Washington, which we've only spent a portion of that. So I didn't have a problem if we did that, but I was one of a few, well, quite a few. But I think it'll be hammered out. I think we'll be all right. But the Common Core is definitely changing, and I think that most of it is going away. And you know about it. The stuff I saw and heard in those committee meetings, I was appalled. I could not believe. I mean, people were bringing textbooks, and people were bringing. This is what they're being taught. And the one lady, I think you were there today. She had places and things covered up that she was embarrassed to show us. And this was being taught in elementary school. Holy cow, I couldn't believe what was in that book. So I think there's going to be a compromise, like on most things, but hopefully it'll come more towards the House version than the Senate.
Yeah, the House version calls for forming a committee of, I think originally like 17 members. I think they pared that down a good bit. But that committee is supposed to be charged with responsibility of coming up with state standards that are more rigorous than the Common Core. But as Carl said, I think it was Indiana was the first state to buy into this, and also the first state to jump out. But what they essentially did, and I'm sure it was Indiana, but I may be wrong, but what they essentially did was simply change the name and adopted Common Core standards for the most part. And we want to avoid doing that, but at the same time, if there's anything in there that is good, then we certainly want to do that.
You
All right?
just need to make sure it's normally appropriate. That's another.
Yes.
Absolutely. All right, guys, thank you so much. You have a great evening. Have a good week.